Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we continue with the study of chapter 9 of In the Buddha's Words, and we come to the section, or this is the chapter on shining the light of wisdom. And now we've finished the chapter, or the section on dependent origination, and now we will come to the section on the Four Noble Truths. But just before we come to the section on the Four Noble Truths, I just want to do a very quick review just to show the way the wisdom is developed in sequence according to the path of practice. So when we take the sections on the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, 12 sense bases, and the 18 elements, these are all aspects of the noble truth of suffering. Because in the first discourse, the Buddha says, what is the noble truth of suffering? That after going through birth, old age, sickness, death, eventually he comes to the last statement. In short, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are dukkha, or suffering. So the noble truth of dukkha, which really doesn't mean exactly suffering, but the unsatisfactoriness of conditioned existence. This noble truth is represented by the 5 aggregates. And also we can just look at the 5 aggregates from another angle, then we get the 12 sense bases. Or looking at them from another angle, we get 6 elements, 4 elements, or 8 elements. But they are all just different ways of looking at the first noble truth. Then when we come to dependent origination, we are investigating the noble truth of the cause of suffering. In the structure or the formulation of the Four Noble Truths, it's just said that what is the origin of suffering? Craving. That's the origin of suffering. But that is just a concise formulation of the second noble truth. When we want to look more, in a more expansive way, a more detailed way, at how dukkha originates, then we have to bring in dependent origination, which shows us in terms of the 12 factors, the particular causal structure, or maybe you call this the causal dynamics that underlie the turning of the wheel of birth and death. Okay, so then as one pursues one's investigation, one inquires into the origin of suffering, and then one goes back contemplating the 5 aggregates or the 6 sense bases as impermanent, bound up with suffering or unsatisfactory, and non-self. Then at a certain point when the insight reaches its peak of development, there takes place what is called the event called, translate this as the breakthrough. The Pali word is actually abhisamaya. Yeah, this event is called Dhamm Abhisamaya. We have the word Dhamma and the word Abhisamaya, which I translate the breakthrough to the Dhamma. But the word Abhisamaya, actually it comes from the stem aya, which means to go or to come, with the prefix sam, which gives the sense of together. And then it has another prefix, abhi, which gives an elevated meaning. So it's the coming, maybe you call this the exalted or elevated, coming together with the Dhamma. This is the occasion when one's understanding comes into complete unity with the truth of the Dhamma. And at that moment, on that occasion, the clouds of ignorance and delusion are temporarily dispersed, and then one can see directly into the ultimate truth of the Dhamma. And when that breakthrough first occurs, that means the occasion of the attainment of stream entry. And what is realized on that occasion with that breakthrough is the Four Noble Truths. But one makes this breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths by seeing, directly experiencing the Third Noble Truth. This is the truth of the cessation of suffering. So what one actually experiences on that occasion is nirvana, just temporarily. It's like the eye opens up and one sees the truth of nibbana as the cessation of suffering. And one sees how with the ending of ignorance, the ending of craving, all of the factors that depend on ignorance and craving will come to an end. But one hasn't yet, at this point, one hasn't yet realized, one hasn't really fulfilled the ending of ignorance and craving. But one has reached a kind of clearing in the woods where one can actually experience temporarily the ending of ignorance and craving. Or maybe to change the analogy a little bit, it's like one is trying to get through a forest, and then you're climbing the hill, going through the forest, till you come to a space on the top of the hill where there's a clearing. And from that clearing you can look down at the rest of the forest, you can see the valley, you can see the river, and then maybe you can see the clear plain on the other side of the river. And then you can also look down and you see the path leading out through the forest, down to the plain, the river, and the villages or towns where you want to go. Okay, so this is why the Buddha lays special stress on the Four Noble Truths. Usually we think that the Four Noble Truths are the basic teachings of the Buddha, and so we think that when you first start to learn Buddhism, what you learn are the Four Noble Truths, and then after you learn the Four Noble Truths, you've pretty much learned all the fundamentals. But actually the real understanding of the Four Noble Truths takes place at that moment when the practice of insight has come to full maturity, the spiritual faculties have reached a certain degree of sharpness, precision, depth of penetration, and then one actually sees and directly knows the Four Noble Truths. Okay, we already went through the Four Noble Truths in a kind of more or less systematic way when we were studying the discourse on right view. So we don't have to go through them in detail again, but there's one important aspect of the Four Noble Truths that I didn't mention. I don't think I mentioned it in that lecture. And this aspect of the Four Noble Truths we see particularly stressed in the first discourse of the Buddha. So that means we now have to go back to a very early point in the book where we went through the life story of the Buddha. And we ended that chapter, we call the chapter the Bringer of Light. We ended that chapter with the Buddha's first discourse, which begins on page 75. And then it continues over to page 76. Okay, the basic explanations of the Four Noble Truths on page 76 we've already gone through in connection with the discourse on right view. But then, beginning about the middle of the page, we come to a very important section. This is the section in which the Buddha explains what is called the 3 turnings and the 12 modes or 12 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So each Noble Truth is presented here from 3 angles. So first we have the Noble Truth of suffering. So the Buddha says, this is the Noble Truth of suffering. Thus, monks, in regard to things unheard before, there arose in me vision, knowledge, wisdom, penetration, and light. Okay, so with regard to the truth of suffering, we have this first aspect, which means understanding what is the truth of suffering. And that would be the definition given in the preceding part of the discourse, that birth is suffering, aging is suffering, and so on. In brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. So this knowledge of the First Noble Truth, this is called, in Pali, it's called Satya. Satyajnana means knowledge of the truth. We put all of them now. Okay, so now after the Buddha presents the knowledge of the truth, then he presents another knowledge that he achieved. This says, this noble truth of suffering is to be fully understood. Thus, monks, in regard to things unheard before, there arose in me vision, knowledge, wisdom, penetration, and light. Okay, the second aspect regarding the truth, this is called Kicca Jnana, which means knowledge of the task. Or we could say it's knowledge of the job to be done. Because in the Buddha's teaching, the Four Noble Truths are not simply statements of fact, but each noble truth presents us with a challenge, a task, some job to be done regarding that truth. And so the job to be done regarding the first Noble Truth is to fully understand it. And to fully understand the Noble Truth of dukkha, this means that one has to investigate the 5 aggregates with insight to see what is the nature of the 5 aggregates, what is the nature of form, the nature of feeling, the nature of perception, the nature of the volitional formations, the nature of consciousness. And then having understood through insight the nature of each of the 5 aggregates, one has to investigate their general characteristics, the fact that they're impermanent, suffering, and non-self. And then ultimately, when one fully understands the truth of suffering, one eliminates greed, hatred, and delusion regarding the 5 aggregates. Okay, so the task regarding the Noble Truth of suffering is that it is to be pariññaya, to be fully understood. Ñaya, the word ñaya means to be understood, and pari is a sense of fullness or completeness. So the Noble Truth of suffering is to be fully understood. Then, when one reaches full enlightenment, then one can declare that this truth of suffering has been fully understood. And so the third aspect the Buddha states here, this noble truth of suffering has been fully understood. Thus, in regard to things unheard before, there arose in me vision, knowledge, wisdom, penetration, and light. And so this is the third knowledge, and this is called Katthakicca Jnana. What does Katthakicca mean? Right. The task has been done. Job completed. You take your time card and you punch out the time card. Okay, so that is, this noble truth, dukkha, has been fully understood. So that is the knowledge of the completion of the task. Okay, so those are the three knowledges regarding the first noble truth. Then we come to the second noble truth. So this is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. And then to fill this in, one just takes the passage from the sutta. What is the noble truth of the origin of suffering? It is that craving that leads to renewed existence, renewed becoming, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there. That is craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, renewed existence, craving for extermination or annihilation. Okay, then we come to the task regarding the second noble truth. This noble truth of the origin of suffering is to be abandoned. That is, one has to eradicate or eliminate the craving. Basically, craving depends on ignorance, so one also has to eliminate ignorance. Okay, so this is called pahatava. That means to be abandoned, to be eliminated. And then the third aspect is the knowledge that this job has been finished, the task done. So this is the noble truth that the origin of suffering has been abandoned. Okay, then we come to the third noble truth. The third noble truth is the cessation of suffering, which, according to the sutta, it's the remainderless fading away and cessation of craving. And this is actually, we'll speak about the fading away and cessation of craving. It's also the truth of Nibbana. Okay, so this noble truth of the cessation of suffering, the task or job facing the practitioner is to realize it. So the noble truth of cessation of suffering is to be realized. The Pali word satchikatthava, it comes from the stem word in Sanskrit would be aksha, which means I. Yeah, the Sanskrit word aksha means I, and in Pali this would become, aksha would normally become akka, but then there goes a slight change of form and it becomes acha here, and then it has a prefix sa, which means with the I, meaning that one makes something visible. One becomes a witness to something. A witness is somebody who sees an event taking place with his own eyes, right? And so if one realizes the cessation of suffering, this means that it's not something just to be understood intellectually, but something that is to be seen with one's own eyes or experienced in one's own body, so to speak. So that gives us satya or sachi, and then katthava means to be done. So one is to make the truth of the cessation of suffering, to make it visible, to realize it, to testify to it. So that is the task, and then the completion of the task is when one has fully achieved Nibbana. Then one can say the noble truth of the cessation of suffering has been realized. That's the completion of the task. Okay, then we come to the fourth noble truth. This is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And what is this noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering? In the earlier part of the sutta, the Buddha says it's the Noble Eightfold Path, starting from right view through right concentration. So this is the that is the knowledge of the truth of self, knowing the meaning of truth of the path, truth of the way. But then there's the job, the task to be done. What is that task? Bhavetappa. This means to be developed, to be practiced. The word bhavetappa suggests the idea of growth and development. Okay, so as one practices, one develops step by step this truth of the cessation, of the way to the cessation of suffering. And then when that path, when that way reaches fulfillment, then the development of the path is finished. So that is the third aspect, the knowledge of the fulfillment of the task, knowledge of completion. At that point, one could say the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering has been developed. And then we can see the importance the Buddha placed on these we call these the three turnings, because one turning is knowledge of the truth, the second turning, knowledge of the task to be done, third knowledge of the completion of the task. That's three turnings, and then Four Noble Truths. These give us 12 aspects, or 12 modes. So the Buddha says, here I'm in the middle of page 77, so long, monks, as my knowledge and vision of these Four Noble Truths as they really are, in their three phases, or literally three turns, and 12 aspects, was not thoroughly purified in this way, I did not claim that I had awakened to the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment in this world. And with its gods, Brahmas, and Mara, and so on. But when my knowledge and vision of these Four Noble Truths as they really are, in their three phases and 12 aspects, was thoroughly purified in this way, then I claim to have awakened to the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment. And so, this full realization of the Four Noble Truths in all 12 aspects, that is central, critical to the Buddha's enlightenment. And all practitioners who follow in the tracks of the Buddha in order to gain the same enlightenment have to realize the Four Noble Truths, not just 1, 2, 3, 4, but 1, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Three turnings, 12 aspects. Okay, maybe before we go on, I'll ask whether there's any questions about this. Okay, if no questions, then we just go on. Back to the chapter, to chapter 9. And now we just have a selection of suttas, which I took almost arbitrarily from, well, not so arbitrarily, I always have a little reason behind each selection, but I take them out from, this is chapter 56 in the Samyutta Nikaya. This is called the chapter of the Buddha's discourses on the Four Noble Truths. So here we have some 100 or 200 short suttas dealing with the Four Noble Truths. And so out of those many suttas, I just chose about 6 or 7. Okay, so the first selection we have here just emphasizes that these Four Noble Truths are things that are realized by the Buddhas of all 3 periods of time. So whatever perfectly enlightened Buddhas in the past fully awakened to things as they really are, all awakened to the Four Noble Truths as they really are. And whatever perfectly enlightened Buddhas in the future will awaken to things as they really are, also the Four Noble Truths. And whatever perfectly, this would be interesting, I have to check this. Whatever perfectly enlightened Buddhas at present have fully awakened to things as they really are, all have fully awakened to the Four Noble Truths as they really are. If this is really a plural, it would be a very curious passage, because I don't know other passages in the Pali Canon which speak about a multiplicity of presently existing Buddhas. We get this in Mahayana Sutras, which refer to other world systems, very distant from our own, in which there are Buddhas living and teaching. But to my knowledge, always in the Pali Suttas, it refers to Buddhas in the past in the plural, Buddhas in the future in the plural. But then the Buddha will say, and I, who am presently the perfectly enlightened Buddha, have done such and such. This really just struck me just now. I'll have to check the Pali for that. Okay, so then the Buddha explains what are these Four Noble Truths. Then this paragraph comes at the end of just about every sutta in this section of the Samyutta Nikaya. Therefore, an exertion should be made to understand this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. So the Buddha doesn't teach the Four Noble Truths just as an abstract philosophical doctrine, but always he ties his exposition of the truths to a particular work to be done. That is, to make the exertion, to know, to understand, to realize the Four Noble Truths. Okay, then the next passage just gives some indication why these are called truths, why they're called satya. The word satya has a somewhat deeper meaning than our English word truth. Usually when we think about truth, we think about a proposition, something expressed in words. But the Pali word satya or Sanskrit satya means both the truth of a statement but also a reality in the world. So the Four Noble Truths are not simply propositions that the Buddha makes. This is suffering, this is the origin of suffering. But they're four realities that are to be understood. And so the Buddha says, these four things are actual, unerring, invariable. Let me write these Pali words down. Am I overloading you with Pali words? I don't want anybody to get dizzy and then think, oh, my head is spinning from this class. It's like I have to learn another language just to sit through this lecture. So if I'm putting too many words on, just stop me. But sometimes to understand the translation, it's good to look at the original, because sometimes the original words have certain nuances, implications that get lost in translation. Okay, so the first of these words is tatta, which is related to another word, tattva, which means something like thus or such as it is. It's a little bit like the late Walter Cronkite, whenever he would end his CBS Evening News back decades ago. That's the way it is. Monday, say April 22nd, such and such a year. So these four truths are the way it really is. That's the way it is. Tattva. And then the next word, it's just a double negation. V means devoid of reality. So vitatta would be false, devoid of reality, not the way it is. But then putting the A in front of it negates that. So it reinforces the idea that this is in fact the way it is. This is not falsehood, but this is real, it's not falsehood. It's not deception. It's not just glitz and glimmer, glitz and glitter. but it's reality. And then the third word is anyata, which means literally not otherwise. So I take this to mean it's not other than the way it is, or not other than the way things really are. We could say that all three of these words are meant to cast some spotlight on the meaning of satya, truth, why they're called Four Noble Truths. Okay, so the same thing is repeated in regard to each noble truth individually. Then we come to the third passage. This, I think, is very well known. Everybody, just about everybody who reads anything on Buddhism, well, anybody who writes anything on basic Buddhism usually refers to this passage, where the Buddha is walking through this grove of Singsapa leaves, kind of tree that grows in India, and he picks up a few of these leaves in his hand, and then he asks the monks, "What do you think? Which is more numerous, the leaves in my hand, or the leaves in the trees overhead?" And then the monks say that the leaves in your hand, those are very few. The leaves still up in the trees are very many. So then the Buddha says, in the same way, the things that I have directly known but have not taught you are numerous, while the things that I have taught you are few. Okay, why haven't I taught many of these other things? Because they're not beneficial, they're irrelevant to living the spiritual life, and they don't lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, direct knowledge, enlightenment, nibbana. Therefore I have not taught them. Then what are the things that I have taught? I have taught this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation, this is the path. And why have I taught this? Because this is beneficial, relevant to the spiritual life, and leads to disenchantment, dispassion, enlightenment, nibbana. And always the ending, therefore the effort, the exertion should be made to realize the Four Noble Truths. This passage here, this selection, is quite similar to another sutta that we had quite a bit earlier. This is the simile of the man who's been shot by the poisoned arrow, and his relatives and friends, they call a surgeon. The surgeon wants to remove the arrow, but the man wants to know, he says, "I won't let you remove the arrow until you let me know who is the man who shot me, what family he comes from, what kind of material the bow was made out of, what kind of material the arrow is made out of what kind of poison he used on the arrow." And so the Buddha says, this man will die before he gets cured of the arrow shooting him. And so the Buddha says, I don't teach the Dhamma in order to answer many of these speculative questions, but there's birth, old age, sickness, and death. And I teach the Dhamma, there's suffering, and I teach the Dhamma for putting an end to birth, old age, sickness, and death, for reaching the end of suffering. Okay, so this is a handful of leaves. Then we come to passage D, section D. And here the Buddha says, it is because of not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of samsara. Again, this is a very weighty and significant statement. By not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths, what particular key factor is being indicated here? Speak up. Rebirth is indicated not by the words, by not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths. Yeah, who said that? Okay, that's the correct answer. This is ignorance, avidya. So the meaning of ignorance in the early Buddhist discourses is not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths. The word not understanding indicates first the kind of, maybe you call this a conceptual understanding. Because first one has to clarify one's view, one's concepts, one's intellectual understanding of the Four Noble Truths. But that's not enough. One has to go on through practice to penetrate the Four Noble Truths. Here, I'll use another Pali word on the board. Yeah, the word anubodha is what I've translated as understanding, but it is based upon the stem of it is the word bodha, which is related to the word that's usually translated enlightenment or awakening, sambodha or bodhi. And then it has the prefix anu, which gives the sense of in accordance with. So this is a knowledge that's in accordance with the knowledge of enlightenment. So it's a kind of understanding which precedes the actual realization. But this knowledge clears the path for the realization. But then the second word is pativeda. This is what is translated penetration. It comes from the stem is veda, which means to pierce. And then pati gives the sense of going up against and going through. So it's piercing right through the Four Noble Truths, so penetrating them. The English word matches the Pali very exactly. Okay, so it's because of not understanding, not penetrating the Four Noble Truths, that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of samsara. That is what leads us on from life to life. And then he just elaborates in terms of each noble truth. Then he says, he's referring to himself, that noble truth of suffering has been understood and penetrated. The noble truth of the origin, cessation, the path has been understood and penetrated. Craving for existence has been cut off. The conduit to existence, that's just another word for craving, has been destroyed. Now there is no more renewed existence, no more future becoming. Okay, then the next passage takes place when the Buddha has been he goes for a walk with the monks. The place is called Patipahana Kuta, I think, which is translated Inspiration Peak. Apparently, it's a high peak, and it is right off that peak, there's a sharp precipice. And so one monk says to the Buddha, this precipice is indeed steep, extremely frightful. Is there a precipice steeper and more frightful than this one? And then the Buddha says, there is. The monk asks, what is it? Then the Buddha says, those ascetics and Brahmins who do not understand as it really is, this is suffering and so on, the Four Noble Truths. Okay, they delight in sankharas, that is, volitional formations that lead to birth, aging, and death. They delight in volitional formations that lead to sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair. Okay, then, delighting in such volitional formations, they generate or create these volitional formations that lead to birth, aging, and death, and so on. And having created these volitional formations, they fall down, tumble down the precipice of birth, aging, and death, of sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair. Okay, so what I found interesting in this passage is that it brings together the Four Noble Truths with another teaching which we've come across, which is hinted at or suggested here. It's not stated very explicitly, but we find it implied by certain words. What is that teaching that's implied here?
Dependent origination.
Exactly. Dependent origination. What we see, those ascetics and Brahmins who do not understand as it really is the Four Noble Truths. What is this but ignorance? Okay, then because of ignorance, they delight in these volitional formations. That is sankhara. And then delighting in these sankhara, they create the sankharas. So this takes us from ignorance to the volitional formations, the sankharas. But then, instead of going into consciousness, name and form, six sense bases, and so on, here we jump directly from the sankharas to birth. Because what is birth but the coming into being of consciousness and name and form? So we go from the volitional formations to birth, then from birth to old age and death. So we have a compressed formulation of dependent origination, and the whole sequence starts from ignorance, and ignorance means not knowing the Four Noble Truths. But then the Buddha takes the counterpart, those ascetics and Brahmins who understand the Four Noble Truths as they are. They do not delight in volitional formations, they don't create the volitional formations, not creating the volitional formations. They do not tumble down the precipice of birth, aging, and death, and so on. Okay, then the next passage, getting a little repetitious already. Okay, the next passage just says that anybody who makes the breakthrough, anybody who wishes to make an end of suffering, has to make the breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths. Okay, and then this is illustrated with a simile. So you can read this on your own. Then we come to paragraph or passage G, This says that the destruction of the taints, the asavas, the defilements of ignorance, craving for becoming and craving for sense pleasures, this is for one who knows and sees, not for one who does not know and see, for one who knows and sees what? For one who knows and sees the Four Noble Truths. Okay, and this takes us through all of the passages on the Four Noble Truths. So now if there's any questions, please. Okay, anyway, there's 3 questions come by email. One, is the word light used in the first discourse related to the nimitta leading into the jhanas? No, it's not. The nimitta means a kind of visualized object that appears when people are doing samadhi meditation, when the mind becomes very still and concentrated. Sometimes people see a point of light, a ball of light, a circle of light, and then that becomes the object to focus on in order to enter the deep samadhi of the jhanas. But the light that's spoken of here in connection with the realizing of the Four Noble Truths, this is the light of wisdom, not the light of the nimitta. Okay, then some people interpret the handful of leaves as the sutta on the handful of leaves as implying that the Buddha is omniscient, that he has knowledge of everything. Is that correct or wrong? This raises the question, is the Buddha omniscient? And the Buddha himself expressly and specifically denies being omniscient in the sense of knowing everything at the same time, everything at once. And my own supposition is that the Buddha never claimed to be omniscient in the sense of having the capacity to know every single fact in the universe. But there's an expression that comes that the Buddha knows all dhammas. And usually within, I think every Buddhist tradition, whether Theravada or Mahayana, this is taken to mean that the Buddha knows every fact, knows everything. So, if my computer gets blocked up, then I can go to the Buddha. I have a little Buddha statue on top of my computer screen. I can pray, Buddha, please tell me how to fix my computer. And Buddha will tell me how to fix it. Or if we have a difficult problem in nuclear physics, subatomic physics, check the Buddha scriptures, certainly the answer is going to be there. Or some problem in future history of the earth, certainly there has to be some prophecies about what's going to happen in the future history. I don't think the Buddha would have claimed omniscience in that sense. But I take the statement that the Buddha knows all dhammas to mean that the Buddha knows all of the principles of the spiritual life, all of the things that have to be done to gain enlightenment and liberation, the things to be avoided. He knows the different ways in which the law of karma operates, the different realms of existence, which kinds of actions lead to which realms, which kind of actions or what kind of path leads to freedom from all of the realms of existence. We will deal later with the different aspects of the Buddha's knowledge based on the early texts. Then the third question is the lighting in volitional formations equivalent to unabated karmic action, in quotation marks. I don't know the expression unabated karmic action, but the volitional formations can be understood as karmic activities. So these are the karmic activities based on ignorance that lead to rebirth from life to life to new birth. Okay. Another question is, please explain the root of the word that's translated taints. Is it the same as the word outflows? Actually, I have to say that I don't really like the word taints, though I use it because when I edited it was Venerable Nyanamoli who used the word taint for asava. And so when I edited his translation of the Majjhima Nikaya, I had to come to a decision. Which words of Venerable Nyanamoli do I change and which words do I keep? And I decided, unless there was a strong reason for changing it, because it was Venerable Nyanamoli's original translation, I should leave his renderings. And when I translated the Samyutta Nikaya, I tried to keep it as consistent as possible with the Majjhima Nikaya translation. So I kept the word taints, and I've even kept it in my upcoming Anguttara Nikaya translation, but I don't really like it so much. It's too far from the original, and maybe it has misleading connotations. But I will explain I will write the actual Pali words and explain its fundamental meaning. Okay, the root of the word, the Pali word itself is asava. Its root is su, which means to flow. And then it has a prefix, a, which can be interpreted either as indicating the outward direction or the inward direction. I'm inclined to interpret it as indicating an inward direction rather than outward direction. Because we have the word gacchati, which means to go away, and then the word agacchati, which means to come. So if somebody comes to me, say agacchati. Then the word harati means to take away, and aharati, to bring. So the prefix a seems to indicate towards oneself. So I understand asava to be things that flow in. So these are things, we call them maybe defilements deep within the mind, say at the very bottom strata of the mind, below the threshold of consciousness, and then they flow up and into the mind. And so I would take them to be inflows. Some translators use influx, something that flows in. Okay, Suki.
Now we understand that the requirement for the enlightenment is really like three terms and 12 aspects of going to understanding and breakthrough. Now, if there are like occasions that people not being trained under the Buddha comes and then how do you explain those cases?
Where people who have not undergone prior training?
Without undergoing the training, sometimes people just come to the Buddha and then they get attain arahantship.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are cases of some who have achieved, just by listening to the Buddha give a discourse, perhaps it's not the case actually. And maybe what I have to say, maybe I should qualify what I said earlier. It's not the case that everyone who gains enlightenment has to actually go through and systematically and sequentially take account of those 12 types of 12 aspects. Perhaps that is something special to a Buddha's enlightenment. But anybody who gains enlightenment, especially the full final stage of arhatship, they do have to undertake or complete those 4 tasks. They have to have the full understanding of suffering. They have to have the elimination of craving. They have to have the realization of nibbana, and they have to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. In the case of those who might be just listening to the discourse, sometimes even on the first time, suddenly, during the Buddha's discourse, they gain even the state of arhatship, just jumping there very quickly. What I would surmise is that these are people who have practiced and cultivated in earlier lives, and so their faculties were very mature, very sharp, very ripe. And so when they heard the Buddha's discourse, even in just a few seconds, they were able to fully comprehend the nature of the 5 aggregates. They cut off craving. They realized nibbana. And then all of the path factors, which they had developed over earlier lives, now just came to maturity and blossomed. So that's what I think happened. Yeah.
I didn't quite get the explanation of asava. You say it's development deep in the mind and then comes to the surface of the mind and it's recorded in thoughts.
Yeah, this is the way I'm understanding it.
And then it's deep in the mind already.
Yeah, because it doesn't actually come from outside, but it's a tendency which is already there. And I sometimes call these the primordial defilements, which keep the round of samsara moving. And so they have to be in the mind at some level, so they're very deeply buried. But then, this is the way I'm just understanding the word asava. They flow into the mind in the sense that they become motives for our actions. Or let's say, flow into the mind and then they govern our thoughts, our emotions, and then they become motives for actions. And also we should know, or should mention, that the word asava was not originally coined by the Buddha. It was a word that was in circulation during the time that the Buddha was teaching. In fact, it was a word which plays also an important role in the teaching of the Jains. But it has a somewhat different meaning in the Jain teaching. In the Jain teaching, it refers to karma flowing into the mind. The Jains have the idea that karma is a kind of very subtle material particle, and so when one engages in actions, defiled actions, those actions cause these subtle dust-like particles to flow into the mind. And that flowing in of the dust-like particles of karma, that is what they call asava.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Is there a sequence among those 12 aspects of returns? Does one have to fulfill the first 3 aspects of the first noble truth in order to proceed to the second noble truth? Or does one go from the first aspect of the first noble truth and then followed by the first aspect of the second one?
No.
So what's the secret? It's called returnings. It has to be
It uses
one.
Parivarta. maybe it's maybe three turnings in the way the Buddha expounds it, because he expounds it in that order. But in terms of, okay, let us put it this way. As one develops insight, one is coming to understand more and more the Four Noble Truths, or the five aggregates. One is coming to understand the five aggregates. And as one is developing the insight, one is weakening craving at the same time. But it is only when one makes the break and one is developing the Noble Eightfold Path. So all these things, these three are taking place simultaneously. But it is only when the development of the path reaches a certain degree of maturity that one realizes the third Noble Truth, that is making the breakthrough. At the time one makes the breakthrough to the third Noble Truth, then the understanding of the first Noble Truth becomes much deeper. And temporarily one cuts off, or permanently one cuts off some degree of craving. And then at that moment the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path reach a kind of peak of strength and precision. Does that answer the question? And so we can say that at this, the occasion of the breakthrough experience, the Four Noble Truths are penetrated simultaneously. But in order to reach that, penetrate that experience of penetration, for most people, one has to begin with gradual cultivation. So it's like a sudden breakthrough, but it occurs on the basis of gradual cultivation. Okay, this will be the last question. Is the complete, excuse me, is the complete ending of the asavas or the taints only available to arahats? Actually, one might say that the complete ending of the taints or asavas, it's available to everybody, at least everybody who practices, but it's attained, the attainment of the complete ending of the taints marks the attainment of arhatship. So the arhat is one who has completely eradicated the asavas. Okay, we'll go on now to the last part of this chapter. And this part is called the goal of wisdom. And so we've been referring to it, but we haven't yet had a clear explanation of it, and that is Nibbana. And so I enter into a field which is littered with landmines, and my talk gets presented over the internet, so I'm going to make enemies on some sides, friends on other sides. Some people will brand me as a fool, other people will brand me as a wise, enlightened guide on the path. I claim to be neither. Sometimes it's interesting to find out what they say about you on the internet. There's one fellow, somehow I came across a link to his website. It's nice to have these flattering words like Bhikkhu Bodhi, the worst translator in the world. He's completely fouling up the Buddhist discourses. He translates anatta as non-self. He doesn't understand that the Buddha is really meaning that body, feeling, perception, and so on is not the eternal, everlasting, glorious, omniscient, omnipresent soul. Okay, so let us take these suttas on Nibbana. And what I say, to understand what the suttas are saying about Nibbana, it's very dangerous or misleading to pick up one sutta and say, this is the proof. What one has to do is to take as many suttas as possible and bring them together, and then one gets a number of perspectives on Nibbana, and then one still has to evaluate these perspectives in order to determine which one is literally true and which is figurative, which the Buddha intends to be a clear conveyance of the meaning of Nibbana, and which explanation has, let's call it, a pedagogical purpose. That is, its purpose is to teach or to direct the disciple in a particular way. Okay, so now the first sutta is a conversation between Sariputta and a wanderer whose name is Jambukataka, which means the eater of rose apples. Maybe he was an ascetic whose practice was to abstain from all food but the rose apple. It's a little fruit that grows in South Asia. So, the word Nibbana was not invented by the Buddha either. Like the word asava, it was one of those words that was floating around that all of the different many of the spiritual seekers were using to designate the ultimate goal of their quest. And so the Buddha took this word and then used it in his own system to designate the ultimate goal. So this wanderer asks Sariputta, it is said, Nibbana, Nibbana, what now is Nibbana? Then Sariputta says, the destruction of lust, the destruction of hatred, the destruction of delusion. This friend is called Nibbana, and then the Noble Eightfold Path is the way to realize Nibbana. Okay, I'm not going to stop at a particular passage. I want to go on, but we bear this in mind. This is one presentation on the nature of Nibbana. Let us skip over paragraph 2. I'll come back to it. Let us go to passage 3 and 4. Okay, passage 3. The Buddha is giving a discourse to the monks, a Dhamma talk connected with Nibbana. And then the Buddha utters this inspired utterance. This is called Udhana. It's where the Buddha, while he's speaking, he gets inspired or uplifted, and then he speaks something which is poetic. So he says, there is, monks, that base. He uses the word ayatana, which is the same word that we use for the sense bases. It's that base where there is neither earth, water, heat, or fire, nor air, neither the base of the... Okay, these are the 4 elements, so there's nothing of physical nature there. There is neither the base of the infinity of space, the base of infinity of consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Those are the 4 formless realms. So, denying the earth, air, water, fire, and air denies the presence of physical matter, denying the base of infinite space and so on, denies that these are the formless or immaterial realms. There is neither this world nor another world, neither sun nor moon. Here, monks, I say there is no coming, no going, but no standing still, no passing away, no being reborn. This is not established. In other words, it's not based on anything. It doesn't have any condition or support. It's not moving without support. Just this is the end of suffering. So from the phrase, this is the end of suffering, we could understand this is Nibbana. It's a state in which there's no material phenomena. It's not the formless realms. Nothing of this world, nor the other world, like the heavens or the hells. It's a realm which is completely transcendent to all our ordinary concepts and categories of thinking. Okay, then we'll go on to the fourth passage. There is, monks, again the Buddha is speaking, giving a talk on Nibbana, then the others, this inspired utterance. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. Significant, the first word here, also in the previous sutta, translated, there is, the Pali word ati, which very clearly is referring to something presently existing. Ati, bhikkhave, the jatam, the bhutam, the kattam, the sankatam. There is something that is unborn, it's not produced from any causes. It's unbecome, that is, it hasn't come into being. It's unmade, not made by anything. It's unconditioned, it doesn't depend on any conditions. If there were no unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, then no escape would be discerned from what is born, become, made, and conditioned. But because there is this unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, therefore an escape or release is discerned from what is born, become, made, conditioned. So the way I understand this passage, it's stating that there is some state, some reality which has never come into being, doesn't undergo any change, it's not made, doesn't depend on any conditions, and that reality is the necessary condition for the possibility of liberation from birth, becoming, old age and death, from everything that's made and conditioned. So the possibility of liberation depends on the pre-existence of some state, some reality, which is unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. And that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, that is Nibbana. Okay, now I want to go back to the second passage, which gives 33 synonyms for Nibbana. So the Buddha says here, I will teach you the unconditioned and the path leading to the unconditioned. So what is the unconditioned? The destruction of lust, the destruction of hatred, the destruction of delusion. This is called the unconditioned. And what is the path leading to the unconditioned? Mindfulness directed to the body. This is called the path leading to the unconditioned. That's actually the first sutta in this series, but then the Buddha will go on to mention a number of other things that constitute the path. Now, I don't want to focus here on what is the path, but what is the unconditioned. Now, we have the unconditioned defined as the destruction of lust, hatred, and delusion. And even this statement could be interpreted in two ways. This is what gives rise to two schools of thought amongst the followers of early Buddhism on what is Nibbana. Usually we say that the Buddha has taught the middle way between eternalism and annihilationism. And yet when we see the way people interpret Nibbana, they also fall into two camps. Those who say, as I do, Nibbana is something unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. That is, in a sense, the eternalist camp in the interpretation of Nibbana. Then there'll be those who say Nibbana is just the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion. That is the unconditioned, just the ending of the defilements, ending of birth and death, nothing else. That's Nibbana. That is, in a sense, the annihilationist camp in interpreting Nibbana. But now, it seems to me that this definition, the unconditioned is the destruction of lust, hatred, and delusion. This has to be interpreted. It shouldn't be taken literally. Because the unconditioned, first, it means something that doesn't depend on conditions. And yet, the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion occurs through conditions. It occurs through the development of the path. So when one develops the path, at a certain point, when one's wisdom is mature enough, then one destroys lust, hatred, and delusion. Then we can say one attains Nibbana, but one can't say that this brings the unconditioned into being. The unconditioned has to be something which precedes the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion. This is my understanding. Maybe some people disagree, I don't know. Then also, it's said that in another sutta that I didn't include here, that there are 3 marks of the unconditioned. No origin is perceived, no passing away is perceived, and no change is perceived while it exists. Now, the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion as an experienced event is something that has to have a beginning. Right now, I have greed or lust. I have hatred. From time to time, I get angry, have resentment. I have a lot of delusion. But as I practice, at a certain point, I will cut off lust, hatred, and delusion and attain Nibbana. But that destruction of lust, hatred, and delusion will be something that takes place in time. It has a beginning. But Nibbana, the unconditioned, the Buddha says, has no origin, no beginning, no end, no change while it lasts. Okay, so I take the unconditioned to be something understood literally, and the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion, this is a statement of what has to be done to achieve Nibbana, and what is accomplished when one achieves Nibbana. Okay, now as we go through here, we'll see that there's this collection of suttas, which I've combined, enumerates 33 synonyms for Nibbana. So the Buddha says, I will teach you the uninclined or unbent, the taintless. This is without the astas, without the influxes. The truth, the far shore, the subtle, the difficult to see, the unaging, stable, undisintegrating, unmanifest, unproliferated, the peaceful, the deathless, the sublime, the auspicious, the secure, the destruction of craving, the wonderful, acharya, the amazing, abhuttam, the unerring, without sickness, the unerring state, the state not subject to any sickness. Nibbana, the unafflicted, dispassion, purity, freedom, non-attachment, the island, the shelter, the asylum, the refuge, the destination. Okay, what I've done is to go through these synonyms for Nibbana and a few others that we find in the text, and I've tried to organize them into 4 categories. Let me put some examples on the board. Okay, I've used four categories for classifying different descriptions or designations that are used for Nibbana. And then I put some examples of each under each category. So the first is what I call the task to be done. What is to be done? What has to be done to attain Nibbana? And what is accomplished when one achieves Nibbana. So under this category, I would put the destruction of lust, hatred, and delusion. I just abbreviated to make it easy. Dispassion, the taintless. We also have some others. In another sutta we have the destruction of craving. In this list of 33 synonyms, we have non-attachment. Okay, the second category would be designations or descriptions which indicate something of the experiential state of Nibbana, its experienced qualities. What is it like to achieve Nibbana? And here we can say the Buddha is highlighting these qualities in order to encourage his disciples to strive to attain Nibbana. So by showing how Nibbana is maybe we call it the high point, the most preeminent form of the desirable qualities that we strive for, that we aspire for in our daily lives, then this strengthens the motivation to attain Nibbana. So in the Dhammapada, the Buddha calls Nibbana Paramam Sukham, which means the supreme bliss. Here in these 33 terms we have, it's the peaceful. It's also called purity and freedom. Or would be some others that would come under this category? Sublime. Could be sublime. Yeah, actually, panita is originally used to designate delicious food. Yeah, you speak about panitang bhojanam, delicious food. But then it becomes used as, we don't want to say Nibbana is delicious. So it's sublime, excellent. Anything else that's here? I think we could put secure there, yeah. Because the word here is kema, which also has the meaning of restful. free from trouble and anxiety. Also another expression, not in this list, but we came across it at the end of paragraphs 3 and 4, it's the end of suffering. Or you could even call it the third noble truth, it's dukkha nirodha, the cessation of suffering. Okay, then we come to terms which I call these metaphysical qualities of Nibbana. If you don't like metaphysical qualities, we can call them philosophical qualities. So here, Nibbana is called, in the passage that we came, paragraph 4, passage 4, it's called the unborn, unmade, unbecome, unconditioned. In these list of synonyms, it's called truth, the deathless, undisintegrating, which means that it's not impermanent, it's stable or everlasting. And then the fourth category are what I call metaphorical terms to indicate Nibbana. So in the list we have the far shore. Of course, Nibbana is not a shore, but this is the image which is used against the Indian background, where during the rainy season, when it's always often crossing rivers to get to the far shore. And so the far shore becomes a desirable destination. So Nibbana is called the far shore. Beyond this shore is the realm of birth, death, and suffering, and the secure place is the far shore. Then Nibbana is called the island, the shelter, the asylum, the refuge, the destination. All these are metaphorical terms. I would put that under the metaphysical. I'll try to put these into a table and then hand it out next week, maybe. For 2 weeks, if you don't have a class next week. Okay, then I want to go on and try to finish the next 2 sections. Now we come to paragraph number 5. This speaks about 2 Nibbana elements. The word here translated as elements is dhatu. Okay, so what are these 2 Nibbana elements? One is called the Nibbana element with residue remaining. These are important words to know in Pali. So I don't give tests, but I'll put them on the board. Oh, would you like to have exams? So the Nibbana element with residue remaining, that is sa-upadisesa Nibbana dhatu. And then the Nibbana element with no residue remaining is anupadisesa Nibbana dhatu. Okay, now we have the explanation. What is the Nibbana element with residue remaining? Okay, here the monk is an arhat, one whose asavas are destroyed, and so on, one completely liberated through final knowledge. However, his 5 sense faculties remain unimpaired or intact, by which he still experiences what is agreeable and disagreeable. He still feels pleasure and pain. So he's still a living being, a human being, still has the body with the sense faculties, and through the sense faculties he'll experience pleasant sensations, painful sensations. It is the destruction of lust, hatred, and delusion in him that is called the Nibbana element with residue remaining. Okay, then we come to the definition of the Nibbana element without residue remaining. What is it? Here the monk is an arhat, one completely liberated through final knowledge. For him, here in this very life, all that is felt, not being delighted in, will become cool right here. That is called the Nibbana element without residue remaining. These are the 2 Nibbana elements. Okay, now, you see, if you take this text as being definitive, without any qualification, then you have a good argument for the annihilationist interpretation. You see, Nibbana for the Arhat, just the destruction of the defilements. When the Arhat passes away, there's nothing. Everything finished. So that's Nibbana. And then, when you come across the other passages, unborn, unmade, unbecome, unconditioned, the annihilationists interpret this, it means an end to being born, an end to becoming, an end to being made, an end to being subject to conditions. That's the way they would interpret it. But my interpretation, this is the way I understand this passage on the 2 Nibbana elements. There are actually 3 aspects of Nibbana, the way I understand it. One is the Nibbana element itself, in itself. That is the Nibbana which is unborn, unmade, unconditioned. But that unconditioned Nibbana element is realized in 2 stages. The first stage is the stage realized in life itself, and that is the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion. The second stage is the stage when, that is the Nibbana element with the residue remaining. And that residue is the combination of the 5 aggregates that has been brought into being through past craving and clinging that has come into this life. So that is the residue that continues as long as the enlightened person is alive. And through this residue, they still experience pleasure and painful feelings, though they don't have any attachment to the pleasure or any resentment and displeasure over the painful sensations. Then the Nibbana element without residue, this is when the Arhat passes away, and because there's no more craving, then the cycle of becoming, of rebirth, comes to an end. And so that's what's meant by saying that all feeling, not being delighted in, will become cool right here. And so there's no more any production of the 5 aggregates to constitute an existence in the future life. So that is the complete ending of the cycle of rebirths. And then this naturally raises the question, what happens to the liberated person, the Arhat, after death? And so the passage called here The Fire in the Ocean deals with this question. Here a wandering ascetic named Vacchagotta comes to the Buddha and asked him, let's start with paragraph 16, when a monk's mind is liberated, where is he reborn after death? The Buddha says, to say he is reborn does not apply. Then the wanderer asks, then is it the case that he's not reborn? To say he is not reborn does not apply. Then is he both reborn and not reborn? That doesn't apply. Is it the case that he is neither reborn nor not reborn? The Buddha says, this does not apply. Okay, then, when the Buddha answers in this way, then the wanderer, Bhaccagota, becomes confused and bewildered because he doesn't understand. And so then the Buddha says, it is enough, or it is really fitting that you are bewildered, enough that you are confused. For this Dhamma is profound, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle to be experienced by the wise. And it's hard for you to understand it since you hold another view, follow another teaching, pursue a different teaching, and follow another teacher. Then the Buddha says, I will question you about this, and you answer me the way you think fit. Then the Buddha takes the example, there's a fire burning in front of you. Do you know this? He says, yes. What does this fire burn depending on? And he says this fire burns depending on grass and sticks. Then if this fire is extinguished in front of you, would you be aware the fire has been extinguished? He says, I would. If somebody asks you to what direction did the fire go, to the east, north, east, west, north, or south, what would you answer? The wanderer says, this doesn't apply. The fire burned depending on its fuel of grass and sticks. When it is used up, it does not get any more fuel. Then without fuel, it's said to be extinguished. And here the word extinguished is nibbutta, which is related to the word nibbana, meaning extinguishing. And so, the Buddha says, the Tathagata has abandoned that form by which one describing him might describe him. He has cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, done away with it so that it is no longer subject to future arising. The same is said with regard to all five aggregates, liberated from reckoning in terms of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. The Tathagata is deep, immeasurable, hard to fathom like the ocean. To say he is reborn doesn't apply, that he isn't reborn doesn't apply. Both is reborn and just is not reborn doesn't apply. Neither reborn nor is not reborn does not apply. Actually, all four alternatives here are indicative of some wrong view. To say that enlightened person is reborn, this would indicate a view of eternalism, that one takes the Tathagata or the Arhat to have some kind of permanent self which goes on existing eternally after he passes away. To say that he is not reborn, in actual fact, from the conventional point of view, one says that the Buddha or the Arhat is not reborn because he doesn't take any more rebirth. But the way that view is expressed by the wanderer, there's the assumption that a person has some kind of substantial self which will go on from life to life until they achieve Nibbana. Then when they achieve Nibbana, that self is cut off and annihilated. And then there's no self to be reborn. Okay, then the combination of both, that doesn't apply because both alternatives are wrong. And same with rejecting each alternative, that doesn't apply. And so then when the Buddha uses these words, that the Tathagata is deep, immeasurable, hard to fathom like the ocean, I see that as almost indicating the nature of the Nibbana element itself. So it's this Nibbana element realized by the Tathagata. That is what is deep, immeasurable, hard to fathom. Like the ocean. Okay, I'll have to stop here, but we'll come back after lunch and then we can have a discussion after lunch, and then any questions that you have about Nibbana. I can't say that I can answer all of them, but... And if any of you don't come to any of my future classes, then I know that... or at least I could suspect maybe they belong to the other camp. Okay, next week is August 8th. We don't have the class next week, but in 2 weeks, August 15th. And then we come to the final chapter of the book. Okay, so we end with the sharing of the merits. Akasata Chapumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Chapumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chapumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Vakantu Mantaram Etavatajam Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatajam Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatajam Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Sata Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavadupadaya Apichi Hetato Etantare Satakayu Kipana Rupi Arupi Cha Asanya Samino Dukha Pamuchantu Posantu Nibuddhin